In a world filled with screens and distractions, we invite you to reconnect with the natural world around you. Welcome to Nature Bound, a podcast dedicated to unpacking the intrinsic bond between humans and nature. We'll uncover the benefits of spending time outdoors, including how a nature-centric lifestyle can improve your mental health, elevate your leadership skills, and unleash your creativity. And now here's your host, outdoor enthusiast, and renowned author of The 7 Principles of the Magic Rock, Emmanuel Rose.
Welcome to this episode of Nature Bound. I am really excited to dig in today because we're going to talk about beginning of spring activities, which is about scouting for turkeys and getting in a position to see and experience turkey hunting in the greater Western United States. And today I have a guest who's been on the show before, and Jim Clark has got over 37 years of hunting turkeys in all the major regions of the United States, barring Florida. So he's done a fair amount of scouting in his career of turkey hunting. And Jim, I appreciate you taking the time to dig into this for me, for my edification.
Oh, my pleasure. Always fun to talk turkey.
Well, that's awesome. I know the last time we talked last year, we talked about boots on the ground, and so this spring I made my focus to get to an area where I knew there were turkeys, and I was able to trout fish while scouting. So I was able to kind of get the 2-for-1 there. I found turkeys in an area about 5,000 feet of elevation, but that was 2 weeks ago. It has since snowed. We're in that kind of spring disrupted time of the year, and so I'm trying to wrap my head around where the turkeys are going to be in 19 days when the season opens, and how I can best understand the nuance of turkey travel and migration during the mating season.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds like you've got a good situation and that you've located turkeys. That's step one. And we talked about that last time.
Yeah.
So this is an important subject, right? Because turkeys they do move around the terrain, and they do so like any other wild creature that we've talked about in the past, Emmanuel. They this time of year, they really care about two primary things. They care about roosting, safely roosting at night, because they spend the nights in trees and they want to be safe. And there's criteria that they need for that. And then feeding, right? They got to eat. And so they need to do both safely. So safety, right, is paramount as a backdrop for where they're going to roost and where they're going to feed. And in between, they kind of loaf. That's really what they care about, particularly the hens. As the spring progresses, and we can talk more detail about that, as the spring progresses, the mating urge starts to escalate for the toms. And so he adds a third element, and that is breeding hens. Right. So then he's only thinking about 3 things: roosting, feeding, and having an opportunity to breed hens. So those are the considerations that really drive your thinking around where you set up and where the turkeys are. So I'll just stop there. But that's really the context of what we'll be thinking about as we work through the season.
Okay. And so in this particular situation, I've got a free-flowing river, got a very small town or a group of houses, which obviously provide its own kind of security for those animals. And then about 1,000 yards away is a small highway, and then north of that is a national forest.
Okay.
And so so that's kind of the initial puzzle that I wanted to get some help from you on understanding, kind of what my next steps are after having located this path of the turkeys.
Okay. So the first thing to think about is where are the turkeys most likely to find those two things, given time of year and the conditions on the ground, right? We'll get back to that, the 5,000 feet elevation. The second thing that you'll need to consider is once you've begun to decipher where they're roosting and where they're moving to feed and ultimately breed and nest later in April, May, then the second consideration is access. Is it fair to assume that you don't have any private ground access where you've located these turkeys?
Yeah, that's accurate. And then on top of that, the spot where I did locate these turkeys, kind of in the middle morning, is right around houses and a road, and not an acceptable place to set up to shoot an animal.
Right. And as you suggested, turkeys actually do feel pretty safe around houses. You've seen them by my house, right? They're very comfortable because there's grass, there's shoots, there's little green shoots that come up. There's bugs and worms and all the things that they like to eat, and then the relative security of not getting shot at in the backyards, right? So they actually are very comfortable in that environment, which is why you'll see them in town from time to time. But they also are very attracted to agricultural areas, because agricultural areas, including areas that have cattle, are very attractive. So we'll get back to that relative to your hunting area. Is you need to be thinking about what are the easiest, most readily available food sources for the turkeys right now, and will those readily available food sources change in, what'd you say, 18, 19 days?
Yeah, right.
At the end of March when California season opens. So that's really the consideration, is if the food source is steady and they have the other things that they need, good roost trees and water nearby, etc., they may not move much at all, particularly if there's no big weather event. So they may continue to hang around the area where you located them. If the weather suddenly, which it can do at 5,000 feet in March, if it goes sideways and snows like it did when we were hunting a couple of years ago, if it's just a brief snow, they typically won't materially move. But if that snow is a pretty good size snow, and particularly if it gets crusty on top where they have trouble getting down to feed through the snow, they'll move down. They'll change elevation.
Sure.
Because again, it's always where is the easiest food to get. That's really principally what the hens are thinking about this time of year, is food, because they know biologically that the nesting and brooding season's coming, and they've got to have as much feed and be in their top form as possible before they expend all that energy, right, on making eggs, hatching eggs, taking care of chicks. So it's all about food, security, and then having appropriate roost trees. Okay.
Right. I got you. And so I guess so there's two things. One is it's likely that they're going to hang out in town even through the this kind of mating season, right?
That particular group you found may very well hang around town if town has, or adjacent to town, an area where they're comfortable roosting, which are typically taller pines that have trees that have a lot of horizontal limbs that are 20 to 40 feet off the ground and are not too thick where they can actually fly up into the tree without banging their wings all over. That's what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Right. So if you think about the types of trees that offer that, it's typically pines, various types of pines, particularly ponderosa, fir, other types of pines, and also trees like sycamores. Okay, they're big trees with lots of branches and so on. Sometimes oaks. So anyway, those are the things that if town offers good roosting area, lots of feed, an area where they're comfortable raising their chicks, which is brooding area. We can talk more about what they care about there. Then they may not move much out of town. And you may need to be thinking about a strategy that involves hunting on the edge of town and knocking on some doors, seeing if you can get access.
Right.
If not, then those turkeys would not be likely huntable for you if they're not mobile. You'll have to find turkeys in the national forest where you can hunt them.
Right. I wonder too about like the flock behavior where you got some dominant male turkeys, and then do they push the jakes out to go and find their own hens, maybe not in that town group?
Well, so the answer is yes. There's a pecking order for everything in nature, as you know. And when it comes to hens, hens really rule the roost, literally and figuratively, right?
Yeah.
That's not a metaphor. They rule the roost. And the lead hen makes the decisions for the flock. And where the flock of hens goes, the gobblers go.
Right.
Now, the gobblers and hens are all typically together in the wintertime. They flock up, there's safety in numbers. And also the reason they flock up is that the food sources are fewer and fewer and fewer. So whatever the most readily available, easy to get food source is, the entire flock of your particular area will be in that spot.
Yep.
And the hens will dictate where they go and where they roost. And the gobblers are along for the ride.
Sure.
Right? Once it gets closer to season, which is probably in the next couple of weeks, you'll start to hear a little bit more gobbling, right? I mean,
Yep.
Turkeys gobble year round, toms do, but not a great deal. But in the spring, they'll really start getting after it, right? In anticipation of the mating season. And so as that starts, the gobblers typically form, little bachelor groups, and they don't like to hang around the jakes. So you'll
Right.
often see groups of, and the hens really don't want anything to do with the jakes as it gets closer to mating season, because they're last year's news,
Yeah.
right? So they're like teenagers. They're a pain in the rump for everybody. Okay. The hens aren't really wanting them around. And the toms, the 2-year-old toms, 2 and 3-year-old toms, they don't want them around.
Right.
And so you'll see jakes flock up in many groups because they don't have any choice, really. It's kind of they're on their own. That's why you'll see flocks of jakes. And then the toms, there is a definite pecking order there where there is a mature gobbler that is kind of the prime breeder, and he's the oldest, and he's won a few fights, and he is the man.
Yep.
And he dictates a lot of the breeding activity. And then there's gobblers that you call the satellite gobblers. They may be the same age, but less physically advantaged. They may be 2-year-olds, and the mature tom is a 3-year-old. And so as satellite gobblers, they hang out with that dominant gobbler, but they don't do a lot of the breeding, right? They're kind of waiting around, hanging around the rim for scraps.
Right.
But you'll see gobblers 2 and 3 at a time, but there's typically one dominant bird. Then you'll often see as the season gets closer, the next few weeks, the jake groups form, and the hens are going to do what hens do. Really, what I focus my scouting on is what are the hens doing? Because where the hens go,
Yeah.
the gobblers, right?
Gotcha.
And what do hens care about? We already talked about that. Security cover to sleep, eat,
Yep.
and brood, raise their chicks.
Yeah. So then, that's interesting. So then in this particular puzzle, I was thinking about, going and looking around town and seeing them, that's easy. And if there's agriculture around there, and I could potentially see them feeding in a field and be able to knock on doors. But the forest that's kind of a little bit higher elevation across that highway, that's where I was thinking I would go and just find some springs, look for meadowy areas, and find some secondary logging roads and do some hiking. What do you think about that plan?
That's a good strategy, because your hunting area is dictated by what you have access to, and you have access to the national forest, like most people, right?
Yeah.
And probably a lot of people listening to this podcast. So you have to kind of go there because that's where you have access. What I would consider doing is try to find the national forest boundary that is closest to where, I'm sure you've already thought about this, closest to where the current turkey activities are.
Yeah.
that you've seen.
Right.
And then from there, turkeys roost they like to roost on steep-ish hillsides in trees that we talked about with the correct type of branches and structure, mature trees near water, because they often often water before they roost, and then right when they fly down in the morning, reasonably shortly after they fly down, they typically need water. So they like to roost in hollows that have creeks at the bottom, near ponds, near lakes, and so on. So it sounds like you have some water sources nearby.
Yep.
Roost trees on 30-degree hillsides with water nearby, reasonably with relatively clear cover around, where they fly down and land, and it's relatively open forest floor. That's what they really like, or adjacent to a meadow.
Yeah.
Because when they fly down, they don't want to fly down into the jaws of a coyote.
Right.
They want to fly down in an area they can see and they know it's safe.
Makes sense.
So those are some of the things that I would start looking for. And then other sign you can look for when you're scouting the national forest. Let's say you go middle of the day, right? You're not up in the morning, you got work to do. You go middle of the day. What you're really looking for, in addition to that combination of trees, hillsides, water, and so on, meadows, like you suggested, is you're really looking for scratchings. And scratchings are where they paw the leaves they scratch with their feet the pine needles and leaves away from the ground, and they're looking for seeds, nuts, acorns, bugs,
right,
worms. Like that's what they eat this time of year in the woods when they're not readily accessible to the fields. So in the area that I hunt and that you've seen in this general area in Oregon, there is agriculture, and there are some cattle, and there are fruit trees and things of that nature. But that's where they're at this time of year, and they migrate up in elevation to where the bigger fir trees are, which is the property that we hunt on. And so there's less there's no crops up there, but there's a lot of other available food, new shoots, acorns, lots of grasshoppers, things of that nature. So there's plenty of food, much better nesting cover, which we can talk about what that looks like, and then the best roost trees in the area. So they'll migrate about 2 to 3 miles uphill to get to that elevation where those big fir trees are. Those fir trees don't grow at 700-800 feet. They grow 2,000 feet, So at least the big ones. So as you think about scouting, look for scratchings, which would indicate they're looking for food. And when you find those scratchings, you can look at them and really study and determine how old are they. If they're all dried out and leaves have blown back into the little scratch marks, the little paw marks, I mean, they're just scratches. They're openings in the leaves about that big.
Yeah.
And they're still clear, and maybe even you see a little wetness there. That's fresh. That's fresh. So, and they typically, if there's a lot of scratchings on a hillside, I'm talking about like 100, that means a flock is in there multiple days in a row.
Right.
So that tells you, hey, I'm on to them. I haven't seen one, I haven't heard one, but I'm on to them.
Right.
Okay. Then, as we've talked before, because the gobblers are going to start gobbling here, they're probably already doing so down in your area in that part of California, possibly, that's where you would want to be there in the evening or first thing in the morning to listen for gobbling from the roost.
Yeah.
Okay. And because that is the best way to locate the roost trees. And think about it. Once you've located the roost trees, if you're fortunate enough to hear some birds gobbling in your immediate area, and then you know where the scratchings are, which is to say where they're feeding. Yeah. And you kind of have an eye toward, well, I need to set up in between those two areas.
Right. Yeah.
It's just deductive. It's, so I'll just stop there, but that's where I would start, is the closest national forest to where the turkeys are in the agricultural area. And then I work my way back or uphill from there.
Right. So that's interesting. They're not going to be shy about moving into higher elevation. That's what I got from that.
Not unless there's a huge snow. But as you and I know, we've shot them in the snow. You know,
Right.
it's like they vacate the area, but they will move to lower elevations if the food becomes difficult to get at. So
Yeah.
yeah. So that's a good place to start.
All right. Yeah. And then, yeah. So then the nesting areas, they like to have a little bit of brushy cover, grassy cover over their head, or what does that look like?
It's not grassy. What I've observed with turkeys is they don't really love long grass for two reasons. Long grass, like tall, really tall cheatgrass or really tall winter wheat, things of that nature, tall grass generally, they can't see.
Uh-huh.
You know, if a predator, bobcat, coyote sneaking up on it, they can't see in grass. A. B, in the morning when there's a heavy dew, they do not like to walk through grass and get their feathers off.
They want to get wet. Yeah.
It's just like us. When you're
Yeah.
bird hunting in the fall in the morning and your boots get soaking wet, turkeys don't like that. You know, you'll see them on this, you know, fly down and they'll flap their wings. They're trying to dry out, you know?
Right. That's
And so the last thing they want to do is go walk through the grass. Now, what they do look for from a nesting cover standpoint is relatively thick ground cover in the form of bushes or brush. Think about it from the standpoint of anything it's typically, you know, like eye level or lower.
Yep.
There's lots of different things that grow in different parts of the U.S. that meet that criteria. And then they like to nest underneath that. And the reason is obvious. The raptors can't get them. Raptors
Sure.
can't pick them off.
Yep.
And so they're doing it specifically to protect themselves and their chicks, because once they've laid all of their eggs, they actually spend the night on the ground. All the other time, they're in a tree. They'll lay one egg in a tree. The next day, another egg in the tree at night. Next day, another egg in the tree at night. But when they've got all their eggs laid, 8 to 12 eggs, then they actually stay on that and incubate those eggs all at once on the ground. So you mentioned they have to have a safe environment where they hear something sneaking up on them.
Yeah, sure.
That's where they'll roost, that's where they'll nest. And then they need an adjacent area where to their nest. Now think about this. What are their immediate needs when the chicks are born? The chicks have got to be able to move around safely. Can't get picked off, particularly by the raptors, which I would say is that and coyotes. And they need feed. They need to eat, right? And so you have to think about the nesting area that has an adjacent area of low growing grasses, different types of low growing ground cover that offers and I'm talking about cover that's 5, 6, 8, 10 inches high, that offers the chicks some level of protection where if a raptor would come over, they can't be seen or they can duck into the thick stuff.
Right.
Again, it's all about safety and convenient food sources. And the chicks will eat little shoots of grass. They'll eat little bugs. They love little grasshoppers, little snakes, things like that. So that's when you're looking for nesting cover, that's what you'd be looking for.
Because the breeding area and the nesting area are usually what kind of proximity to each other?
It varies. The toms will breed anybody, anytime. Okay.
Okay.
Right. As soon as that hen lays down and says, "Hey, I'm ready," he's going to be on it. But the breeding area generally is around areas that have some open woods or meadows where the toms can strut and show off their feathers. Right. That's the thing. And so the little openings in the woods, little meadows, I think you've seen some of this when you've been hunting, field edges, anywhere where the hens will be feeding. So there has to be some feed there. And the toms can strut their stuff is an area where there's often that breeding dance. And sometimes they'll breed the hens right there. It might be a half a mile from their nest.
Right.
It won't be 5 miles from their nest, but it might be 200 yards to a half a mile from their nest. But typically it's a little bit closer than that. They typically do a loop, especially these mountain birds. They'll in higher elevations, they'll have a kind of a loop that they do where they fly down, they go to an area where their hens are feeding and the toms are strutting, right? And if the hens are ready to breed, they may do a little breeding right then. Might take that first hour and a half of the day. Now it's 10 o'clock. And now there's a period where there's a little loafing. The hens are just resting. I see them in the backyard do this quite frequently at like 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. The hens are just chilling, right? They're trying to,
rest,
trying to recover from some activity. If you ever seen a gobbler breed a hen, you realize that is not a comfortable situation for the hen to have a 20-pound tom treading their nails on its back. But they're just resting. And so the toms at that point are very vulnerable after, let's say, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, when the hens are no longer interested. The toms are out looking for love, right? That's another really good time. And again, they're looking for other groups of hens to breed at that point. So they may cover a lot more ground than the hens, but they'll, the hens are going to work, move through their area, feed, scratch, depending upon the food source, and eventually, somewhere around, depending upon time of year, half hour before dark, they're back at those same roost trees, typically, getting ready to fly back up. So it's typically a loop.
Gotcha. And then I have observed that there have been toms that in strange unexpected places, like it seems like the toms are moving bigger distances than the hens.
That's right.
Other birds.
That's exactly right. And that's the result of them saying, I've bred all the 5 or 6 mature hens in my home flock.
Yeah.
And I've got to find some new blood. And they're, sometimes they're looking for love in the wrong places.
Yeah.
And they wander over onto public land, and then what happens then? They get shot. So
they get chased. Yeah.
But that's why you're seeing them in weird places, is they're looking for love. They're looking for new hens to breed. That is the only thing that they care about at that time of year, other than just basic security and food needs.
Yeah. Well, all right. I think I have some good marching orders. I really appreciate you taking time to have this conversation with me.
You bet. I'm anxious to hear how it goes, and I hope you locate those birds right over the line in that national forest. Because when you do, right, one of the greatest satisfactions in all of hunting, and particularly turkey hunting, is when you have done what you've done. You've intentionally scouted. You were double dipping with the trout fishing, which is a great way to scout for turkeys, right?
For sure.
And then you've found birds, and then you've done your research. You got actually understand where the property boundaries are. You've located national forest, and then ultimately locate the birds and shoot one on public ground. That's legit, right? Yeah. That's next level. So I wish you much success in that endeavor.
Well, I appreciate that. And let's see if anybody else wants to have a conversation with you about turkey hunting. They track you down on LinkedIn, or where would you like to get connected?
I would say yes, that's fine. LinkedIn is fine.
Okay, we'll get that in the show notes, and then you can somebody might reach out to you. But,
sounds good.
Well, I appreciate it. Go feed the turkeys in the backyard, and that way we'll get some more reports on turkey behavior from you.
Interestingly enough, they're not up to this elevation yet. They're still down low.
Yeah,
so I haven't seen a turkey. I'm at 1,000 feet. I haven't seen a turkey in 3 months, but that 5 miles down the road, there's 150 of them. So I'll let you know when they show up.
I like it. I would expect to see a spreadsheet with temperatures and zone information.
You might be waiting a while.
Fair enough. All right, Jim. It's good to see you. Hang out for a second. Let me wrap this up.
You bet.
Okay, thanks. Wow. Well, there it is. That's turkey scouting master's level conversation there. I can't get the PhD till I go out and spend some more time with the boots on the ground and find the birds where they're in a position to hunt them appropriately. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation today, and I hope that you'll think about getting out and finding a turkey on your own. So thanks for joining, and look forward to
Thanks for listening to this episode of Nature Bound. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss a future episode. If you found value in today's episode, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Be sure to purchase your copy of The 7 Principles of the Magic Rock at emmanuelrose.com or on Amazon. We thank you again for joining us today, and remember to get nature bound.